possible. So what are we going to do today? What we're going to do is, well, one thing I want to make clear is that we're not doing a product tour. It's not a general tutorial. I realize that a lot of you might be new to Quizalize, and there also might be a lot of you that are very familiar with Quizalize. And it's important to me that I cater to both audiences. And what I'm going to do today is literally go through how does Quizalize help with distance learning? What features do we have that will be able to help you? How do you use those features in a distance learning scenario? And then, you can kind of go back, and if there's any blanks that need to be filled in terms of other tutorials that we can provide, we have them, we'll send them to you, and you should be good. So we'll do an introduction really quickly. I'm going to go through a sample lesson, how I would have done things if I were, I'm not a practicing teacher anymore, but I'm going to go through a lesson that I would have done if I were still teaching right now, based on my own experience and my knowledge of the product, obviously. If we have time, and I haven't been overly talkative over the course of the webinar, I'll go through our mastery dashboards, because I think that's something that's important for you guys to look at. And of course, Q&A at the end. But in reality, I'll check the Q&A every 5 to 10 minutes or so, and I'll be sure to answer as many questions as possible. Just a really quick introduction to myself. My name is Chris. I am from New Jersey. I taught science in New Jersey for over 7 years. I got my master's at Rutgers University. I am representing here with the shirt. Shout out to anyone who else is watching this that has gone to Rutgers and is from New Jersey. I say this not because I'm not touting my teaching experience just in isolation. My point is that a lot of what I am going to talk about today stems from experience. So I'm not just someone who works for an ed tech company that works in sales or works in customer success and is just trying to connect with teachers based on talking to other teachers. I'm coming to you from experience. And I think that's important for you to know. And if I say anything, and I often say things that are my own personal opinion, they, again, they're based on my experience. And actually, I hope that you challenge me if I say something you disagree with. So please, email me. You're going to get an email from me. Email me back if you think I said something that you don't agree with, or you want me to maybe have qualified a little bit better. Now, we're actually based in London. So had a really awesome opportunity to move with my fiance who works for PNC Bank, and they gave her a job opportunity to move out here for 2 years, and we took advantage of that for sure. That for me was a great opportunity to move out of teaching and do something different for a little while, and so that's what I did. I entered. I work for Zish now. Zish is the company that makes Quizalize, and I do customer success, which is basically I'm the person that comes up with all the assets and the training, and I do my best to make sure that you guys can get the most out of Quizalize, not just in terms of how to use the product, but again, the pedagogy is important to me as well. So it's perfectly suited for me. Any teacher that's looking to take a break from teaching for a while, this is exactly the kind of job that is perfect for you. So I recommend looking into it. Not to push anyone out of teaching, but every once in a while we want to do something different. And that's what I did, and I'm really happy with what I'm doing. Not 100% sure if I'm going to get back into teaching or not. I feel like the world is my oyster, although it's a pretty claustrophobic oyster these days. Yeah, I wish it wasn't quarantined for the last few months that I'm here in London, but I think everything's going to turn out okay, and we'll get the most out of this situation as we can. So our very brief Quizalize overview, because again, a lot of you are very familiar with Quizalize and some of you might be brand new. So let me just get through this. And again, if you are new to Quizalize, rest assured, I have a lot of tutorials that I'm going to send your way, but I just don't want to get bogged down too much in a product tour. So I just want to do a very brief overview, 3 slides, in terms of what Quizalize can do and sort of give you that context that's necessary to get the most out of it. So for starters, we're a formative assessment platform. You can assign quizzes, you can assign PDFs, YouTubes, web links, and you can do it in a gamified environment, or you can just assign to your students. You can even give them multiple attempts on any individual assessment that you give, and it's just a way to collect data and information about your students and what they understand. It's formative assessment to a T. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that we do, but we are, again, at the surface, we're a formative assessment platform. Now, again, we pride ourselves on the data, and whether it be short-term data or long-term data. So on the right, what we're looking at is just, this is a screenshot of maybe a teacher's activity list, which is all the assessments that this teacher has assigned. And there's all sorts of data that they've collected on the students that have taken that assessment. And we're going to take a look at that a little bit later. And again, more tutorials on that. And on the left, we also do a lot of long-term data aggregation, which is a little bit more unique to us. A lot of the formative assessment platforms are about quick hitters. We did a survey, and we got about 250 teachers to respond. And we asked, what do you use digital formative assessment for? And a vast majority of them said the number one way that they use digital formative assessment was to just as a review. So you teach a lesson, or you assign an activity, and you want to review and you want to see how much they understood. And that makes sense. It's great. But there's also long-term formative assessment data that you can collect that gives you not just information about the lesson you just taught, but information about lessons you're teaching every single day, and especially if those lessons have skills and topics that you cover a little bit of each day. So this is, the English teachers tend to have this issue, which is they give essays, and students have to read books, and they have to read essays, and have to read passages, and there are certain skills and topics that transcend the concepts. And it would be nice if they could track along the way how often students are answering certain types of questions incorrectly. So you can tag your quizzes. Each question could be tagged to a curriculum and skills and topics, and you can track that along the way. Now, this right here, this is actually the reason I work for Quizalize. When I was first looking for jobs, I was a teacher. I had no idea what I was doing, because teachers are actually pretty ill-equipped to move outside of teaching. Unfortunately, we don't network very well. My recommendation to all of you, whether you want to leave or stay in teaching, it doesn't matter. I think you guys should get on LinkedIn more. I'm telling you, every other industry uses networking to help them meet more people inside the industry. Teachers, for some reason, just don't do LinkedIn. And I didn't either when I was teaching. And that hurt when I was actually looking for jobs, when I was actually looking for jobs outside of teaching. Even though it was in the ed tech industry, it didn't matter. I had no network. And I got really lucky. I met some people at Quizalize. And what really stuck out to me was the fact that we have this automatic differentiation feature. I remembered how difficult it was to assign follow-up activities to my students and sort of give them the most appropriate activity, appropriate resource based on what their level of understanding was. Because I'm just one person. If I have 30 students in the classroom, it's really difficult to put them in the proper buckets. And whether I want to put them in the same buckets, or if I want to mix them up, it's such a difficult proposition. So the fact that Quizalize can automatically assign a follow-up activity that you think is appropriate based on how they perform on a quiz, just to differentiate just a little bit, that was something that I saw and I was like, wow, like that, I wish I had that when I was teaching. Okay, so I'm going pretty fast, and I do apologize. I'm going fast on purpose because I want to get through to the meat of what we're doing today. Just gonna do a quick check on the are they hiring people? Oh, Terry, hey, what's up, Terry? Well, certainly, if we're hoping to expand very, we're a fairly new company, fairly in the sense that we're newer than most of the companies you guys have heard of. And yeah, I mean, obviously, we're definitely going to want people in the U.S. at some point. We're mostly all in London, but obviously, if things work out properly, then we're going to be expanding big time in the U.S. So Terry, honestly, yeah, reach out to us and we might be able to figure something out. I said I wouldn't check the chat, but I will, just to make absolutely sure I'm not missing something. And again, if I'm if I'm breaking up, I'm sorry. I think that there's some settings. I think it's hit or miss with a lot of users. I've been doing webinars in this exact location multiple times the last month or so, and I haven't had issues. At least, most of the issues have been on the other end, on your guys' end. So, it might be the connection. Let me double check my connection to make sure I'm on the right Wi-Fi. Yeah. So yeah, if I'm breaking up, it might be you guys. I wish I could do something about that. All right, so I think we're good to continue. We do have bloggers. We have Heather. She's amazing. She's our head of marketing. And if you're interested in helping to spread the word about us, I can just reach out to me and respond to an email that I send you at the end of the or when I do the follow up, and then I'll forward your information if you're interested in helping us. Okay, so let's move forward. I think that's pretty good for the overview of Quizalize. So, you know, what are we gonna do? Like, one of the things I really want to do today is like, okay, let's look at what a tangible lesson plan would look like that incorporates Quizalize. Because I think we're past the point where you're just trying to figure out what tools you're going to use. Now it's like you need a very visual representation. Like, how is this actually going to work? How is it going to look, not just on the teacher side, but how's it going to look on the student side? Most of you have already been social distancing and quarantining for a long time at this point. So your ability to connect with your students is quite limited. So it's probably a bit stressful to you figuring out what does it look like on my student side. And it's really difficult for you to understand what their students are even seeing. And I can tell you right now, we've also gotten a lot of feedback from parents. They're equally as stressed out and they're equally as concerned about how all of this is going to play out. So, you know, we're going to try our best to give you guys an idea of what that is going to look like and how it's all going to work. But then, you know, there's a little bit, you know, there's a little bit of faith, and then there's also a little bit of you being able to set up a certain set of expectations for how it's going to work with you and your students, and that will give you a higher chance of success. So we're going to look at, you know, how you can set your quizzes. We're going to look at how you can communicate with your students about it, whether or not you can do a live stream or create a video that provides to them some of the results of your quizzes to make sure that the students are getting, you know, getting that sort of that feedback that usually give inside the classroom setting. And then, of course, we'll kind of work with you guys. And if I don't know what kind of software you have available, there's a lot of people here inside the webinar, which is awesome. But of course, that also means that we've got a lot of people from a lot of different countries, a lot of different walks of life, a lot of different levels of accessibility for your students and for you. Right, to start. Okay, so one of the cool things about what we do is allow a lot of flexibility about how your quizzes are going to be assigned. And not just quizzes, but again, you can assign PDFs, you can assign YouTube, you can assign web links through Quizalize. I do realize you're probably gonna do that mostly through LMS 9 times out of 10. But with us, you could also assign those resources as well. But the difference is you can tie those resources to a quiz with us, which is what I'm gonna show you later. So when you assign something, the great thing is you can set it to be available for a certain block of time. And this is important because one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I've gotten from the teachers that I've spoken with about the challenges that they're facing as they start with the distance learning initiatives is it's really difficult to have consistency. It's difficult to lay down expectations, and really it has to be about routine. So one of the things you could do is communicate to your students and say, listen, every single day for my class, based on what our expectations are, I'm going to make a quiz available at 3 p.m., 1 p.m., whatever it is. And you could set that, right? So you set your quizzes to be available at a certain time, and you could tell them it's going to be, you know, you're going to have an hour to take it, you're going to have 3 hours to take it, or you have until Friday to take it. So you can set a very specific time for your students to be able to take that quiz, and then whatever other activities you have planned along with it, obviously, are also going to fit within that time as well. But the other neat thing is, you know, one of the things that you can do is you can set quizzes if you want to give them a sort of time limit. We don't time our quizzes, but you can say, listen, we're going to do a live class. I want everyone to be there at 3 p.m. and I'm going to have a quiz available until 3:15. So you got to get there, take your quiz, because I don't want you to be looking up answers along the way. That's another concern a lot of teachers have. It's very difficult to monitor what the students are doing in a distance learning environment. But if you just give them a little bit of a time crunch, which again, accessibility doesn't work for everyone, but it can work in some scenarios. I taught AP classes, so I would have done it in my AP classes because that's a reality of AP classes is that time crunch is important. But, again, there's a lot of flexibility here that sort of gives you the power to have students access your quiz at a very specific time. And it could be multiple quizzes. If you look on the right, students would enter your classroom and Quizlize, and every single thing could be set just ahead of time. And you can basically say, okay, class starts at a certain time, and then they enter the class, and there's their activities, and you've already set it up, and they just got to go. And then, of course, another thing that's really important about Quizlize, and really positive feedback we've gotten from a lot of teachers, because it helps extend student learning, is the idea that you can set the attempts to unlimited. This is where I come in, and I am kind of bring in my own personal feelings and personal experience and the research that I've done and teachers that I've talked to during my career. I personally don't think you should ever limit the number of attempts. Now, I understand why you would. You might want to get a grade out of the quiz that you're assigning, and that's 100% valid. You still need to collect grades. But I will say that Quizlize, even if you give them unlimited attempts and have them access the quiz for as long as they want to, it doesn't mean that you can't still pull a grade out of it. So you can actually filter their attempts on your side. You could say, you can take the quiz as many times as you want, but I'm only going to grade the best out of the first 3 attempts, or I'm only going to grade the first attempt. And you can filter your data on your side. You can filter it by that attempt. And you could say, I need you guys to have access to this quiz because it's a great review opportunity. But however, just be aware you need to take that first attempt seriously, because I'm going to filter by the first attempt, and I'm going to grade you on that first attempt. So if you get 3 out of 10 the first time, I'm putting 30% in my grade book, but you better take the quiz multiple times because I need you to improve so you can do better on some sort of future assessment or future activity that we want to do, because these are things I need you to understand. Quick check on the Q&A. Looks like we're good. Now, so where are we, right? We're at the ability to assign a quiz, assign an assessment for a certain time, and we're at the ability to set it to be taken in a certain number of times. So the next thing that you can do with Quizlize is you could automatically assign a follow-up activity. So I always make jokes about this. It's our set it and forget it feature, where when you're in a distance learning environment, you can basically sort of give your students a little bit of a lesson plan that completely puts them into a different bucket depending on how they did on that quiz. So again, you set a quiz to be started at 1 p.m. and then you also set follow-up activities that the students have to complete based on how they do on that quiz. So, right now we set it at 3 buckets. Our plan is actually to make those buckets a little bit more flexible. Right now they're hard cuts at 50% and 80%. So when they fall in certain buckets below 50, above 80, and between 50 and 80, they get a different follow-up activity based on what you assign. We do plan on having webinars in the future that will highlight some of the teachers that are actually using the differentiation feature quite often, and we're hoping to invite them into a webinar along with myself so that they can give you some pointers on some of the best practices there. But it's a really cool feature that's gotten a lot of traction, which is actually, I think, the reason that we've gotten so many new users sign up to our platform, and the number of active users in our platform has nearly doubled since the COVID outbreak. And I think it's because it gives teachers the ability to assess, but also be confident that the students are doing more than just taking a quiz. They're being assessed, they're getting information about what these students understand, but they're also, again, confident that the students are being directed to do a follow-up resource that is appropriate, that will help them improve and help them understand better the things that they're assessing on. So what can you follow up with? You can follow up with a PDF, so it could be a worksheet. If they get less than 50%, I might give a worksheet that literally just lists all the vocabulary and says, you need to write down the definitions of these vocabulary terms, or give them a Quizlet set, a link to a Quizlet set that is that vocabulary. And maybe just understanding the terminology better will help them get into the next bucket, because when they answer the questions again, they're like, oh, okay, I just didn't know the definitions of those terms the first time I took the quiz, but now that I know the definitions, I should have a better chance of getting these questions right, so that they gradually get up into the next bucket. So this is kind of one of those things that I did want to show you from the student's perspective, because again, it's important you understand what the students are experiencing. So as a teacher, you've set your quiz and you're like, okay, I'm going to assign a crash course video for students got less than 50%. I've got a Nearpod activity that I really like. I'm going to put a link in there for students of between 50 and 80. And you can tell I'm a science teacher here. And then you got my physics and biology or whatever chemistry simulations that students can do in order to stretch them a little bit. It's a really interesting thing for students to do when it's clear that they actually know the basic material that you're trying to assess them on. So depending on how they do, you got a different resource that they're going to complete. Actually, I'm going to skip this because I want to go here first. I'm going to go back in a second, but I want to show how this differentiation works. So a student is going to see your activity, and this is what the activity list looks like. This is your class, and you can toggle between the different classes. And then the student is going to start a quiz that you assign. And so if you've assigned follow-up activities, we're going to see what that looks like from the student perspective. So they take their quiz and they do quite poorly. They're going to save and finish because you want to push them forward into the next activity. And then when they do that, they're going to be driven back to their student dashboard, and they're going to see the follow-up activity that you've assigned. So they take the quiz, they get a certain score. Notice how they don't exactly know how they do it, depending on what settings you toggle on or off. And then here's their follow-up activity that is going to hopefully help them get into the next bucket. They watch this YouTube video and they indicate to you that they've done it, and they start trying number 2. And so they're basically just going to keep getting pushed back and forth. Take the quiz, do the follow-up activity, take the quiz again, hopefully do better, do another follow-up activity if they did do better, and then again, they take the quiz again, and then they hopefully get up to that third follow-up activity. If they started below 50, they hopefully gradually get up to above 80, and they get different follow-up activities along the way. So on your end, you can actually monitor what the students are doing, which is again, like, this is important because you don't know what the students are doing until you get that feedback. And it's a very difficult situation in a distance learning environment because, you know, in this case, you can see how many students watched or completed the follow-up activities. You can actually see whether or not they started the follow-up activity and whether they indicated that they finished it. And there's a lot of information you can get that gives you more insight into what the students are doing than you would otherwise. Now, obviously, it still doesn't completely, you know, I think it does a really good job of mimicking that real-life classroom environment, but we're creating a digital environment here that is as indicative of the real-life classroom environment as possible. So actually, that's interesting. I've never seen the student side before. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you guys how to do it, but I can tell you one way that you can see the student side is when if you know how to open a browser window incognito or in private mode, then that would be a way to be signed in as a teacher and signed in as a student at the same time. I would recommend trying that at some point because it is important that you see what it looks like from the student's perspective. If you're just pushing things in their direction and you're not fully understanding what they're experiencing, that's going to be much more difficult especially the distance learning environment. It actually kind of brings me to another point that is a little bit outside the realm of what we're talking about, but it's based on a lot of the experience that I've had trying to help teachers come up with solutions to the problems that the students are having. So here's some advice. This is really important. And this isn't just about us. It's about if you want any support whatsoever in any of the tools that you're using, here's what I would recommend if your students are having a problem. So 1, get evidence. If your students report that they're having an issue, the first thing you do is you say, send me a screenshot, send me a picture. You need to visually see what they're saying. And this is me coming at you from a customer service perspective. Obviously, I deal with a lot of teachers in the support role, and a teacher will tell me they're having an issue. I mean, they'll literally type in, hey, I'm having an issue. And then I'll respond with, okay, what is your issue? Can I get see it? You know, like, we need information, right? We can't help you unless we know what's going on. And the same is true with your students. Now, why do you need evidence? I do hate to say, we've had way far too many scenarios where students have said they couldn't access a quiz, but the reality was they could have, they just didn't want to. And so they were saying that they were having technical difficulties. That's number one. So you obviously need the evidence to sort of prove that that is in fact the case. Two, you need the screenshot, because if you're going to come talk to me about it, I need to see that screenshot. So when I talk to my tech team, I can tell them what I'm seeing and what the student is experiencing. So that's really important as well. And you know, the third part is I could actually tell you right now what's going to solve the problems 9 times out of 10. Upgrade the browser. Sometimes the browsers are just out of date. Students are really bad about upgrading things. Restart the computer. And that's true for you guys as well. You guys should do it every single day. Restart your computer every single day, especially if you're doing a lot of video things back and forth. Restart your computer every single day. It needs sleep just like people do. The longer computer runs, the more errors it accumulates, the more random access memory it starts to take up. Every single night before we go to bed, shut it down. And then when you wake up, power it back up, and you should be good. And then the other thing is, of course, operating systems need to be updated as well. When I was teaching, we had iPads, and my students were always like, I can't access this, I can't access that, blah, blah, blah. And I would look at their or their iPad, and I would have to look through the cracks, because I swear to God, every single one of them dropped it at some point. But I would look at the iPad and I would say, okay, well, it's because you haven't upgraded your iOS or operating system like for 3 months. And so they're just really bad about that. So we need to be just every single day, be very vigilant about your students, and it's going to be even harder to keep on top of them about taking care of their devices. So those are things that if they restart the computers, if they restart the browsers, they sign out of things, they upgrade update their browsers as often as possible, many of the issues that they're having will actually be solved just from that alone. So that would be the first thing you should do. Get a screenshot, make them update everything, make them restart the computer, probably going to be okay. Good question. Are there any video tutorials for students that I can send them to learn how to use Quizalize? We have a starter PDF that helps them to access quizzes the first time. We don't right now, and I think that you've exposed something that I need to work on. I'm going to do that tomorrow. Actually, it's not going to be very hard. I'll work on creating a video video and a help article that you can share with your students to kind of help them understand what they need to do, especially when it comes to the differentiation piece, because the differentiation, they do have some special instructions that they need to know about in order to make sure they do it properly. So yeah, you know what, we don't, so we're gonna make that happen. It's not too difficult, and I think that's a fair request. All right, cool. So let's recap where we are. What have we done at this point? You know, where we are in our journey of trying to provide some sort of lesson to our students. We've assigned a quiz. We've set it to be available for a certain period of time. We've assigned follow-up activities so that when a student takes the quiz, they're directed to complete some sort of activity to extend their learning, and also to be able to assess how much they've learned throughout that journey, things that you can see on your end. And I guess the other question is, how do we communicate this to our students? So that's what I'm going to show you now. It's a slide that I glossed over, but only because I felt more appropriate to go into the differentiation since I just mentioned it. So many of you, not all of you, many of you have LMSs, and if you have an LMS, then that's going to be your main mode of communicating with your students. And I would presume that when you communicate with your students, everything is going to be going back to the LMS, going back to Schoology, going back to Canvas, going back to Google Classroom, going back to whatever it is that is sort of your centralized way of communicating with your students. You have to keep that consistency. You can't get overly creative with your students right now as much as we'd want to. And there's maybe a lot of really awesome lessons and awesome things that you want to do with your students around this time of year, but this isn't really the time to give them some complicated set of directions. Bring them back to your LMS and start there. Establish consistency, establish a cadence, establish a routine, and that's how you're going to get the most out of them. Otherwise, they're just constantly going to be confused. So, you know, what I would do is we used Schoology back when I was teaching, and so what I would do is I would create an assignment, and I would say, okay, I have a Quizlize quiz I want you all to complete. I'm going to create an assignment for it, and here's the directions. So how do students enter the quizzes? All you have to do is go to zzI.sh. It's the same URL every single time. And you can even create a link for them, so all you have to do is click on it. We don't have a Schoology integration. We don't have a Canvas integration. And you know, that's going to be a really difficult thing for a lot of companies to do, because Schoology, for example, has their own assessment. As crappy as it is, they have their own assessment, and so they just don't want to integrate with other assessment platforms. So unfortunately, we aren't able to have a real strong integration with Schoology. We do have a full integration with Google Classroom, which I imagine many of you use. I don't have a screen that shows you about Google Classroom, but one of the tutorial videos that we'll provide to you just walk you through the Google Classroom integration. It's very easy. You can assign directly through Google Classroom, and you can't do it yet, but soon the grades from those quizzes will get pushed back to Google Classroom. So right now, all you can do is assign through Google Classroom, but soon we're actually working on that backwards integration as well, so that when students take a Quizlize quiz, they'll access it in Google Classroom, and then it's also going to push the results back to your Google Classroom gradebook as well. So we're really excited about that. I know that's going to be a time saver for a lot of teachers. So every class has a code. You just share the students what get them to access the browser, the zzI.sh. They have to enter the class code, and obviously give them as many directions as possible, because if you don't tell them exactly what to do, then they're not going to do it, right? They're not going to do anything, because that's what students do. So this is how you would share it with your students. Just do it through the LMS. Send them a message, create an assignment, create a post, create a link for them. They'll click on it, brings them directly to Quizlize, and they'll take their quiz. They'll do their follow-up activities, and everything's taken care of from that centralized location. We're working, there's a question about transferring grades into a PowerSchool gradebook. Well, that's related to Schoology, actually. Again, we've tried to integrate with Schoology, and they basically said no. And again, it's because Schoology has their own assessment thing going on. And what we are doing, though, is we're trying to improve our export abilities. So our gradebook right now, you can't export anything from the gradebook, but we're actually working on a gradebook export. So at minimum, you'll be able to export everything from your gradebook into some sort of Excel file, some sort of file that you could then import into your LMS. So we're not going to have a direct integration directly with the API of the other companies, but that's one thing that we're working on as well, to help you sort of get those grades into the LMSs that you're working on and where you're monitoring their grades. So can you show us how to include a link to a website as part of the follow-up activities? My students can't access YouTube, so you have to attach a link to a video in Google Drive. Oh, interesting. Okay. Laurie, I'm going to have to, I think that's a little bit specific. When I do a follow-up email, respond to me and we can set something up and we can try to work out what that issue is. It says it doesn't allow you to insert a link to. Yeah, I think that we're going to have to talk about that because I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly if I can address that right now. If you assign a quiz with a 15-minute time limit, is there a way to turn off the differentiation so they have time to complete the quiz? Well, the differentiation is, if you're setting a quiz with a 15-minute time limit, you probably shouldn't have quiz differentiation as part of it. Differentiation is completely optional. So when you assign a quiz with differentiation, that's an optional thing that you decide to add on to your quiz. You could absolutely assign a quiz without differentiation at all. If you just want to assign a quiz, go for it. So it's not about turning differentiation off. It's about whether you are interested in including differentiation as part of your activity. Okay, so I think we're caught up on questions. Again, there's some questions. Again, if I don't get around to answering every single one of your questions, or if I don't provide a satisfactory answer, certainly just connect with me and we'll figure it out. Okay, so I'm going to move forward. We're at the point where we've created a quiz, we've assigned it, students are able to access a certain time. There's follow-up activities. We're setting it and forgetting it, and students are definitely going to be engaged as they go through quiz to activity to quiz to activity. So remember, I skipped a thing so I could move forward. Okay, so one of the really cool screens. It's actually it's either my first favorite or my second favorite screens in terms of the type of data we can get from the quiz results, and that's the improvement screen. I have spent a lot of time researching motivation when it comes to students and student engagement. Yes, we have the gamification piece, and if you can live stream the game to your students, great. That's going to certainly increase that motivation. But actually, one of the biggest motivators for students is tangible proof that they're learning. It's tangible proof of improvement. And so if you can indicate to them that they've learned something quantitatively and say, you guys improved X% as a result of the follow-up activities that we've assigned to you, that is actually a more powerful motivator than anything else. That's not just true it's true of everyone. So we have an improvements feature where when students do take the quiz multiple times, you can track how the class has improved overall. And so what a lot of teachers are doing these days is they're offering some sort of rewards program for the class if they improve by a certain percentage overall. So, you know, they get 33% on average on their first try, which is really low. I know that that's not an ideal percentage, but I'm actually a staunch believer of the idea that if you're going to give a quiz and you haven't taught them anything yet, then they should get something low. They should be cognizant of the fact that they don't know what you're about to teach them, and then you're going to teach them, and then whatever those follow-up activities are, whatever that lesson plan is, you're going to show them. Guess what? You only knew 33% of the material before we went through a lesson plan. Now, as a class, you understand 91% of the material, and that's a huge motivator to the students. They walk away or they turn off the laptop and they move on to their next thing, and they feel really good about themselves as a class, right? And you can reward them for that kind of improvement. But of course, you can also see it on an individual student level as well, which is obviously more motivating to that individual. And again, it's about monitoring whether or not they're completing the follow-up activities. It's about monitoring whether or not they're taking the follow-up activities seriously. If you see a student has taken the quiz 4 times and they haven't improved at all, then I think it's time for an intervention, right? But if there's other students that have improved, then it's time to reach out to them and say, hey, that's really cool. I'm really happy for you that you were able to improve so much just by watching a few YouTube videos or watching a video that I made for you. So there's a lot of really great positive reinforcement that can be gleaned from this improvement data that we're getting from the multiple student attempts. Then, of course, there's the flip side. If they're not improving at all, then we've got to do some serious self-assessment, right? Not just assessment on ourselves necessarily, but assessment on the resources that we're using. So if you assign follow-up activities and you're finding that they're not resulting in student improvement, then there's 2 opportunities here. One, opportunity to get student feedback. Ask your students, get feedback from them and say, hey, what was it about this follow-up activity or this resource that I assigned to you guys that just wasn't compelling to you? And they probably will come back and say it was boring or whatever it was, but you're going to get some honest feedback from your students, and you'll know whether or not that's a good resource. And you might want to start to look for a different resource or talk to your peers and say, hey, I'm having trouble teaching this concept. This is what I'm using to teach it to them. This is what I'm trying to help them understand. and they may come back and say, you know what, here's a different resource, why don't you try this? So you're getting that legitimate data, that quantitative data that's telling you whether or not your resources are effective or not. And I think that a lot of teachers overlook that possibility. They just want to move forward. They want to move forward, and I think that's part of the issue sometimes, which is you don't really get that automatic feedback on the efficacy of your lesson plans or of your follow-up resources, and this is a way to do that. So definitely check your improvements over the multiple attempts, and check to see whether that improvement level is satisfactory to you. Good question. I have a question about the gradebook again, and I'm actually glad I'm getting questions about the gradebook. I don't have screens to show you the gradebook right now. What I can say is that we're giving the gradebook a really big overhaul. The question is the gradebook fixed to where it records the top score? No, you could actually filter the gradebook to show whatever score you want it to. So a lot of teachers, I had mentioned earlier that you shouldn't be afraid to allow students to take a quiz multiple times, because you can always access what their score was on the first time. So I wouldn't rob them of the ability to continue to use that quiz as review, to continue to practice, because you just want to get one score out of it. Leave it open to multiple attempts, but then you could just filter your gradebook by the first attempt, and you could filter individual quiz results by the first attempt as well. All that is definitely highlighted in later tutorials. All right, so this is the last thing that I think is really essential for some of the distance learning that we want to be able to use Quizalize for. So again, continue to recap. We assigned a quiz. We offered differentiation to the students. They do follow-up activities, and we're getting information about what the students understand, what they don't understand, and we're also getting information about how much they're improving as a result of the follow-up activities that we're assigning. Okay, how do we communicate these results to the students? So absent the possibility of doing some sort of live streaming, which is possible for a lot of teachers, but that's not an assumption I want to make. The assumption I can make, however, is that most teachers do have the ability to do some sort of screencasting. They could just essentially record their screen, and they could talk over PowerPoints, much like I'm doing right now, just not doing it live, just making a video and then sharing it with their students. And if you can do a Zoom or Google Meet with your students as often as possible and go through the results with them live, awesome. But I think for a lot of teachers, that's not going to be a reality very often. So I hope that you're equipped with things like Screencastify, Explain Everything for the Apple users. Those are two that I've used extensively in the past. I use Screencastify when I actually make our tutorial videos. So talk to your district administrators, get very familiar with what your screencasting capabilities are. But you can make a video that is going to be very powerful in terms of transmitting results and feedback back to your students based on a formative assessment. So this is, I mentioned earlier that the improvement screen was either the first or second favorite screen that we offer. This is the other one. I still can't decide which one I like better, but this one's unbelievably powerful. It's what I use in my classroom every single day. Every single time I give a formative assessment, when I was ready to have that discussion with my students, this is the screen that I showed. Again, I didn't have Quizalize. There was another screen. I'm not going to tell you what I used, but I would have used this one if I had known about it when I was teaching, because it actually gives a better breakdown per question, but also per answer choice. And so this really highlights the power of the multiple choice question and how multiple choice does a better job than any other type of question in addressing misconceptions. So what this screen does, it's called What Do They Need Help With? And you can see at the top there, I can show student names, which is obviously only something you would want to show yourself, but this is a screen that's tailor-made to sharing with your students. In a classroom environment, I would project it up onto my screen. in a live streaming environment, I would just zoom it out to my students' devices. But I think if anything, this is a screen that you could actually just create a screencast video pre-recorded and share it with your students later on based on a quiz that you've assigned. And so basically what it does is you can see how many students got the question correct, and you can see how many students answered certain incorrect choices, which is exactly why I said earlier how this is the perfect screen for addressing misconceptions. A well-written multiple choice question is going to have incorrect answers that have distractors that are on purpose to, again, to address those misconceptions. And it could be terminology, it could be word choice, and it could be something that you think students misunderstood and you want to verify that they misunderstood it. And now we can look at this question and say, you know what? I need to explain to my students not just why the question that you got correct is correct, but I need to explain why this is an incorrect answer, all right? And so it's a really powerful tool in terms of addressing those misconceptions. So I think that if you're going to use Quizalize, I hope that you also use this screen and create some pre-recorded videos and share them with your students to say, here's a 3 to 5 minute video that I created that explains each individual question that I gave you in terms from the Quizalize quiz, and it goes into the breakdown of all the questions and you know, what the misconceptions were and why the correct answer was correct. Do a quick Q&A again. Yes, you're going to get a copy of this webinar. It's always being recorded, so don't worry. I do tend to talk fast, and I do apologize. If I do talk too fast for you, I'm sorry. I will try to slow down. As far as accessing this screen, again, we have tutorials that are going to help you with the more specific aspects of what I'm trying to show you. I'm trying to show you the end result of how it looks once you sort of figure everything out. Again, I didn't want to go through too much of a product tour. More of that's like, how does this work in a distance learning environment? And you know, I can answer the question very quickly. In your teacher dashboard, there's a button that you can press. It's called what do they need help with? So, you know, when you're looking at the teacher side of things and the teacher data, you're going to get things like who needs help, what my students' scores are, and then there's another one that's called what do they need help with, and that's going to be the breakdown of this right here. When I send the tutorial videos as a follow-up to this, one tutorial video is called Quizalize Quick Start. You'll see exactly where the screen is, and it's a 5-minute video. It just helps you get onboarded real quick. And then once you're onboarded, once you understand how Quizalize works, now you can start thinking about the things that I'm talking about today and start incorporating them as you sort of get some of the more basic things down. You know, it was tough for me. I didn't know how to walk that line necessarily in terms of how much do I cater to people that have never used Quizalize before. I do want to say that what we're doing today is, again, thinking about the end results as opposed to walking you through a lot of those features. So let me do a quick time check. So it's 10:55 here in London. It's what, 5:55 on the East Coast, 4:55 in the West Coast, Central, and then of course even earlier in the West. So that more or less covers what I wanted to cover at minimum. Because we have about 5 minutes, I'm going to actually exit this really quickly, and I'm going to show you another feature of Quizalize that I think is important to you to understand. I mentioned a few times that you can tag quizzes to curriculum standards and you can create mastery dashboards. So when you create a quiz, you actually have the ability to tag those quizzes to your curriculum standards. I'm using Next Generation Standards, and when I create a question, I could tag that individual question to a very specific skill. So when you're creating your own content, if you're the kind of person that likes to do that, I absolutely was. I created all my own quizzes. I hated using other people's quizzes. It took as much time trying to figure out whether their quizzes were good as it did just coming up with my own questions. And I think that's an important exercise as well, because if you're putting a lot of thought into what you want to assess your students on before you even start teaching them, then you're sort of constantly cognizant of what it is you want them to know along the journey. So I was a staunch, I would always create my own content. It was very important to me to create my own content. But again, I know that you guys don't have a lot of time, especially now. And we do have a lot of content in the system that is already tagged. So that's another tutorial. You can find lots of content that's already tagged to your topics and skills. But why is this important? Why do I want to show you this? Because if you have content, whether it's created by you or you find it in the platform, that's going to give you the ability to start building. Here we go. Building this mastery dashboard, which is long-term data aggregation is sort of the key to Quizalize. And I can sort of toggle things back and forth, and I could say, okay, if I'm looking at this skill right here, then I could see that the entire class is struggling on these 3 skills. And on top of that, I have a lot of students that are individually struggling on those skills. So it gives me an opportunity to sort of pepper them with follow-up resources that are more appropriate based on the skills that they're lacking in. And of course, I could look at a skill like this, and I realize that my students understand the skill quite well, and you know, I don't need to spend as much time reinforcing it. I can spend a little bit more time reinforcing these skills here. So when you tag your quizzes to your curriculum, then this is the type of dashboard that you can get. But you know, it requires being consistent, you know, assessing them quite often to figure out where they are. And you know, mastery dashboard can be quite powerful if you're vigilant and creators are finding those quizzes and assigning them. We have many curriculum. If we don't have your curriculum, just reach out to me. I'll forward you to the people that can help get that curriculum in there. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really cool things you can do in Quizalize. One of the things that is part of that is being able to give a curriculum assigned curriculum tag quizzes. Let's do one last check on the Q&A. All right, so it looks to me like I think I've addressed most of the questions. If I haven't, again, just respond to my follow-up email and just ask for more information so you get sort of a direct line to me. Let me check the chat as well, because there might be some things in there that I need to address, unless it's just you guys saying bad things about me. Do they have foreign languages curriculum? We do have a few. I'm not a foreign languages teacher. I do know we have many world language curricula inside of our platform. When I send the follow-up tutorials, that'll give you an opportunity to kind of check yourself on whether or not that's something that you can access that we have for you. Can you make the, okay, so Amanda has a good question, and it's related to our differentiation. Can you make the setting where a student can't move on with another attempt unless they do the follow-up activity? So again, you know, there's a tutorial that I have for this, and I'm going to share it with you. It's, you know, there's no video that's more than 5 minutes, but I will give you a little bit of an answer to that question. The students have to indicate to you that they have completed the follow-up activity. The tricky thing is, because we're completely browser-based and it's not an app that's installed on their device, it's very difficult, nigh impossible, to actually monitor them as they're doing the follow-up activity. It more or less directs them into the direction that they need to go and then complete the follow-up activity. So my response to that is, in truth, you know, we don't have that direct integration unless we have a special browser downloaded, and there are a few browsers that can sort of lock students in, but that's whether or not the students have that browser open on their device. It's going to be something that is going to be very difficult to deal with in a distance learning environment, because again, you can't look over their shoulder very well, but you can see whether they've done it. They have to indicate that to you that they've done it. And then if they're not improving, if an individual student isn't improving, but every other student is, that's kind of a clue in terms of whether or not that student is completing that follow-up activity. If none of the students are improving, then that might be more indicative of the efficacy of that activity. So, we can kind of read between the lines. We could make some determinations on just based on the results and their improvements. Remember, keep going back to that improvements page on your teacher data dashboard. That improvements page is going to give you a lot of information, even if you can't directly monitor them while they're doing the follow-up activities.